and welcome to the January 24th, 2022 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using as our state and community continue to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. Looking ahead, tonight's regular meeting will include a public forum. Information about how to participate is available on the city's public webcast and meeting materials web page. And as always, other avenues of communication with me and city councilors are available, including email and voicemail. And thank you again for joining us. And with that, I think I am going to turn it over to Assistant City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Christy Hammett sitting in tonight for City Manager Maderi. I'm really excited to be here to get to hear the conversation about the Housing Implementation Pipeline report and some asks of council to continue to move forward. This is just an incredible effort, cross-departmental effort that you can see a lot of folks on the team represented tonight that have really come together to put together a document that provides greater transparency around all of the things that we're doing in the housing realm. And I think that it's going to really help us moving forward. It's an excellent document to provide a policy framework connecting the funding of sources to the action to show, the steps that we are taking and the progress that we are making. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Planning and Development Director Denny Bro to get us started.
Good evening, Mayor and councilors. I think Amanda's loading up a PowerPoint, yes. And as Christy mentioned, we're back this evening seeking your approval of the HIP, which is the Housing Implementation Pipeline, which is an action plan to address our community's housing needs over the next 5 years. And you have the full HIP document, which is in attachment A in your packet. You'll recall this off-ramp image from your March work session where we talked about getting off of the worn out path of addressing housing needs across the continuum of as kind of separate siloed discussions and efforts. And as an alternative, taking this off-ramp towards a more coordinated systems approach to meeting the city's overall housing needs with current and future resources and the clearer priorities, goals, and outcomes within the HIP. And in previous work sessions, we previewed a spectrum of strategies, action items, and measurable outcomes that we hope to achieve in the HIP. And I'm happy to say that with a robust cross-department effort, we now have the HIP drafted for your consideration. So we have made that proverbial off-ramp turn, and now we're looking to get your stamp of approval, which will really shift our focus from our planning phase to implementation of the HIP action items. And I'd like to just add that although this is the final draft of the HIP for your consideration, I think it's important to recognize a couple of things. First, we know our housing crisis is deep and wide. We've talked about that. The HIP strategies will undoubtedly put us on a path to address many of our housing needs across the full spectrum of housing, but it has limitations, mostly resource limitations and market forces limitations. So the HIP isn't likely to solve all of our housing problems over the next 5-year period, but it's a really good starting place. And then secondly, the HIP document and the content is designed to be iterative, adaptive, additive as we move forward. It's not set in stone. There's lots of road work ahead. And we fully expect that there may be additional initiatives and strategies that you may want to consider as we move further down the road. So things may need to be updated later. But today we believe that the current HIP plans provides for greater focus, clearer goals, and with the resources and strategies identified in the plan, we fully expect the HIP to advance the process of improving housing situations for many individuals and families in our community that are struggling to meet their housing needs today. So with that, I'm going to ask Amanda to walk you through the presentation.
Good evening. It's good to be here. I'm I'm Amanda Noble Flannery, Senior Analyst in Community Development. I'm representing a truly cross-city collaboration that includes planning, the City Manager's Office, Building and Permit Services, Public Works Engineering, the City Attorney's Office, and Central Finance. We've been coming monthly since October to review the HIP creation and get your feedback. I'm excited to be here today for your review of the updated document and the opportunity for you to take action on it. I'll review the process we've been through, recap the purpose of the HIP, highlight the HIP goals, and review the next steps if the HIP is approved. After implementing other key housing tools and strategies work last year, we were able to bring to life another of the housing tools and strategies recommendations for a housing implementation strategy. We kicked off the idea for the HIP with you in March. At the October work session, we reviewed the major components that would go in the draft document. In November, we reviewed the draft with you, and based on your feedback, we added a section on place-based solutions for transportation corridors. During November and December, and building off of the extensive public engagement of the Housing Tools and Strategies work, we presented the draft to various advisory groups. While no formal action was taken, they were supportive of the work. In December, you discussed the HIP and downtown housing, and you approved the use of ARPA funds for an initial investment in city fee assistance for affordable housing of over $2 million. And that brings us to today. So the HIP provides a roadmap, benchmarks, and an order of operations, an internal work plan that pulls all of our housing efforts, including for the unhoused part of our community, under one roof with established goals and metrics. We recognize that continuing on our path of siloed and disconnected solutions wasn't sustainable and wasn't going to be sufficient in responding to a problem of this significance and urgency. This is the housing continuum. It's at the core of the HIP. The continuum lens reveals housing as a system, meaning the goals, programs, and services across the continuum relate to and impact one another, allowing community members to move through the continuum as they are able. The three focus areas of the HIP are various groupings of the housing continuum bubbles, shown in those gray bars under the bubbles on the slide. The homelessness focus area is both of the homelessness bubbles, covering community members who are unsheltered and those who are sheltered. Income qualified housing is the affordable housing and moderate income housing bubbles, both of which is housing where people have to verify income eligibility before moving into the units. And overall housing supply is the income qualified bubbles plus market rate housing. The HIP establishes goals across the entire continuum of housing. These goals are reinforced with immediate actions and sustained impacts planned in 2- and 5-year increments. We reviewed the specific goals at the October work session, and in general, I'll share a high-level summary. Starting with the 2-year goal highlights. For homelessness, 250 new safe sleep sites spaces by the end of those 2 years. With our partners, we're going to complete the Emergency Shelter and Navigation Center, adding 75 low barrier shelter beds in a permanent facility. For income qualified, supporting developers to preserve and construct a specific number of income qualified units with a specific focus on increasing affordable rental and home ownership opportunities. Investing in the development of new permanent supportive housing units for people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. And with the city fee assistance council approved in December, our goal is to secure the opening of 280 income qualified units and support an additional 90 units that won't receive other city support. For overall housing supply, one of the tasks pending additional resources is to create an anti-displacement plan to achieve equitable housing access and benefit the health for all people in our community. Moving on to the 5-year highlights. For homelessness, participate in implementation of an integrated regional support system of homelessness services, cultivate non-traditional partnerships that support people experiencing homelessness. For income qualified, by the end of the 5-year period, we will support preservation of 325 affordable housing units, support opening of 835 new affordable housing units, meet the TAC goal for 263 new permanent supportive housing units, and support 129 units of mixed income housing. For overall housing supply, these goals overlap with the previous goals for income qualified housing and are for across the city and across the housing types. Our goal is to issue permits for the construction of 6,000 housing units, to increase the amount of housing downtown by 50%, an increase of over 1,000 units, and throughout the work of the HIP, to embed racial equity lens processes to create more equitable outcomes. Today, Council is asked to take action on the HIP. The HIP period is for July 1st, 2022 to June 30th of 2027. Between now and July, staff would work on specifics of implementation, including staffing, advance initial policy initiatives such as renter protections and downtown housing, and continue related work, including growth monitoring, climate action, and homelessness. The HIP includes built-in review periods whereby staff will bring updated information to Council. The first one will be after year 2. The timeline in Appendix A of the HIP shows the potential policy and program exploration. Many of them will only be possible with additional resources. Decisions related to authorization and funding of programs will continue to be made through those regular processes, including the budget. So 10 months ago in March, following the recommendation of the Housing Tools and Strategies Working Group, we were here talking with you about the idea of making a rapid turn away from the status quo, separate projects and programs, towards a new trajectory of a coordinated systems approach, an approach that we described as a housing implementation pipeline. Today, that sharp turn of the metaphorical steering wheel has become the document in attachment A of your packet. It's ready to be finalized with your review and approval. We recognize that the path charted in the HIP is based on what we know today, as well as the resources the city has available. It certainly won't solve all the issues we will confront, and we will need to do more as we learn more. The benefit of the HIP is that it does allow us to bring in other strategies and resources as we progress. The only thing we can say for sure is that we know things will change. There will be new problems and there will be new ideas and resources. The HIP provides a framework to help us accommodate changes and be more responsive to our housing needs while also maintaining our responsibility to the community. We're here to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that just kind of reminder of the big picture on this. I will just say that I have been saying to people this weekend as I read this final draft, if you don't read anything else the City of Eugene produces, read this document, because it's so complete, it's so coherent and cogent. It really, I think, just such an incredible job of tying all of these pieces together for us in a framework that really will help us see where our decisions fit in within a broader framework and with our goals and values. So I really am just proud of this work, and hope that many people in the community will actually take a little time to look at it, because I think it explains a lot about how we're going about this work, and want to thank you for that. Are there counselors who have questions or comments that want to be in the queue? Counselor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo your enthusiasm for this work. And Amanda, thank you for the presentation. Denny, thank you for your leadership. Assistant City Manager, Christy, thank you for your leadership. I thought I heard a return in 2 years with an update on the 2-year program. And maybe I misheard, but I suspect that the HIP, the Housing Invitation Pipeline, first brought to us in March of 2024. Here we are in January of 2022, coming back to us in 2024. Either I misheard, or I would submit that council and the community could benefit greatly from more regular updates. Without getting into the weeds, I would just long for either a quarterly or even an update twice a year. Did I hear right that there's a return in 2 years with the update on the 2-year plan, or are there opportunities for more frequent check-ins?
I'm sure we can provide more regular check-ins on the work. The overall review and updating of the document is set to happen after the first 2 years. So that would occur, and we would bring a report to you in FY25 and FY27. That's year 3 and year 5 of the HIP period as a formal kind of report.
But nothing more frequent prior to that.
Not for a formal report, but we can certainly, and I believe we would plan to be communicating more. Will, I don't know if you have something else to add on this.
Hi, Will Dowdy, Community Development Director. Councilor Keating, I think that the interest from council that you're describing is great and to be expected, and so we can certainly provide more frequent communications. We don't have a schedule for those besides those more kind of momentous ones that Amanda was describing. But this feels like the kind of project we would want to communicate on more regularly, and knowing that this is an interest that we're hearing from council, we can provide regular updates.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. The other thing I want to hone in on, and I've brought it up before, the 50% increase in housing downtown. We have received a report, something like 90% plus of downtown residents are renters. What's the 30,000 foot snapshot for increasing the housing downtown and around the corner, let's say in 5 years? Do you see, or 10 years out, that increase in housing downtown, is that a balanced ownership, 50% ownership, 50% renters? Do you see it continuing as being a rent heavy part of our community? That's the piece that I'm on board with the increase of housing downtown, and obviously up is the way to go. But I'd like to hear the 30,000 foot snapshot of the approach, and is it a healthy approach for a balance of renters and homeowners in that downtown core?
I can start to answer that question, Councilor Keating. Thank you for that. We've always had a strong interest in homeownership, particularly downtown. I think the last home ownership project that we did was the Tate condominiums, wildly successful. The market has changed since then. Condo construction has problems with insurance, class action lawsuits, financing, all of those bundled together. If you look at condos nationwide, the construction of condos has gotten much more difficult. It's a bigger hurdle. I hope we can get back there, as we're trying to meet our climate goals and walkability goals and density goals. It would be really, really good to have homeownership units downtown. We'll continue to encourage it, but the market forces are a little challenging.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, Mayor, I may take a second round, but I want to at least give colleagues an opportunity to participate. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Emily and then Claire.
Thank you. Thank you for all this amazing amount of work. It seems incredibly ambitious and awesome if we can do it. I'm just kind of like, whoa, wow, this is quite a lot of building, which we need, but it's just sort of astounding. I'm not really sure how all that money is going to work out, even with the list of acronyms and all the different programs that we're going to use. It certainly does going to be cross-departmental and cross-funding things. Can you talk a little bit more about the MUPD tiers? Does that mean like our low income LRPD and then our market rate MUPD? Is this a in-between tier? Just a little more info on that.
Sorry, we have the two tax exemption programs, the low income one, the LRPD, and then a market rate one in the MUPD. I'm not sure that I'm following the rest of your question.
There's a alternate streamlining and make the application less costly. That's great. I know there's a thing in here about different tiers in the MUPD, and I thought one of them was limited to 60% instead of very low income.
So the LRPD, the existing tax exemption, is a 20-year program that provides an exemption for projects that offer units at 60% area median income and below. The MUPD statute at the state level does have a low-income housing component to it that the City of Eugene and City Council have not utilized before. We would need to do some research into that to see how that would complement the LRPD program. It would be a 10-year tax exemption. And it talks about low-income housing, but we would need to figure out what the income level is and make sure that it would be providing an additional benefit. It would be available citywide. MUPD right now is for targeted areas. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, roughly. I'd be interested in, not right now, further understanding of that. And as always, I'm worried about those SDC charges. How are we going to increase our systems to, deal with all this development? I understand using it as an incentive, but how are we going to pay for them? I mean, is that coming from the general fund? Are we really just using the general fund to pay for housing? And if so, let's say so. But it just seems like it's pretty much always on the list, SDC waivers. And more people, even if it's on the same amount of land, need more things to take care of their house and themselves. So I'm more interested in.
You muted yourself, Emily. We missed that last bit.
Sorry. It was a little bit difficult because we didn't get the final package late, and I still have a hard time with all that screen. So I'm not really sure what the differences are between the last one and this one. I feel a little awkward okaying something I haven't actually read. So should have gotten a paper copy today, but I think it's basically the same thing, and so I just reread that.
Thank you. Claire and then Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so my first comments are kind of technical. Emily kind of just addressed it. If there is a paper version, it must be on my front porch. So I was kind of waiting for the materials and didn't get them. So I found them through the city's website and our agenda packet links. And secondly, we normally get an email with the slide deck of the PowerPoint that we're going to have. And I don't think that email came through either. So I don't know if that's because Jessica's out. So sorry to be a little bit complainy. I would like a hard copy of this, but I am prepared to approve it because what you've presented and what I'm seeing as I go through on my iPad comports with what you have shared with us over the last several meetings. So I'm not seeing any surprise or change or thing that raises any kind of red flag. And I think this approach is really good. I really appreciate the strategic approach. Like Councilor Semple said, I recognize there's still some questions in terms of how we might accomplish certain things that are laid out in the plan and what are we giving up in order to do something. And those are questions we'll have to face as we go forward with the plan. But having a plan is a huge step forward. Versus coming at us ad hoc with this project and that project and not seeing how it's tied into our strategic goals and strategic needs. I especially appreciate the calling out of the goals laid out in the TAC report for more than 200 permanent supportive housing units and connecting back to that other work that we did and invested in and said was something that we endorsed. So I'm fine with supporting the motion to approve. I don't have that motion in front of me. I'll find it on website. Thanks.
Thank you. Mike and then Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate staff's report and all the work. This is a lot of work that's gone on for a long time, and I genuinely appreciate everything you guys have put into this. I don't know who to ask this question to. I think it's Denny, but I'm not really sure. So I'm just going to throw it out there and see who wants to jump in. First of all, I also appreciate the systemic approach to this. I think that was smart. I think looking at it on a broader scale and saying all of this actually happens in the marketplace within a continuum, and here are the parts we have to do over here, and here's the ones we've got to do over there. And I think that's very smart. We've set larger goals over time. When we established the urban growth boundary, we set some numbers and goals. And well, I want to take that back. I don't know. We set goals. We set benchmarks about where we needed to be successful. I guess I'm asking Denny, in a couple of years, when we look at the end of this, how will you gauge success? What will everything we wrote here got done? Will that be success?
I think that's a really good question. My first response would be, my hope is that we are at least meeting the goals for what we set out in the HIP plan for number of units and et cetera, et cetera. I feel like what we've ironed out here is achievable. I think it would be a disappointment if we don't meet those goals, because most of the resource we need to achieve those goals, we've identified. Mm-hmm. I think to have real success though, and I think we've heard this from council, we probably need to do more, because as you know, we have a huge supply issue in Eugene in both rental and ownership. And, we'll make a dent in that supply chain, but we probably also need to do more. And
yeah, that's where I'm driving. Yeah.
I think real success lies in our ability to be additive, to start here and see as we go down the road, how do we even do more? Because I think that's where we'll start to make even more. We definitely can have an impact on the market and stabilize it to some extent, but we're not going to fix everything with the resources we have currently in the plan that we have currently.
I appreciate that. I think there are other things we can do in the larger scope, like get out of the way in some instances. And I look at and please, you don't have to correct all the dates right now. I may not hit them all exactly as staff is tracking them, but we passed the urban growth boundary in 17. It was adopted in 18. My recollection is that it covered the planning period 15 to 35. If I'm off a little there, that's fine. The larger point is that, and again, please correct me, my recollection is that we said there'd be 34,000 new people in town in that planning period, and it looks like we're on track to come close to being double, which is what I said at the time. I thought we were insufficient at the time. But that process created a goal of 15,000 new units to be built in that 20-year window. And as I recall, that was 8,600 single family and 6,400 multifamily. Do we have any kind of dashboard anywhere online that says, here's how far we are in the process of here's what success is based on what we know we have to see built?
Alyssa's online, so maybe if she can pop up, that would be helpful for her to answer that.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Alyssa Hanson, the Planning Director. Councilor Clark, I was waiting for that question. And I'm happy to report to you that the first draft of the comprehensive monitoring report is in the hands of the Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. So there's not a dashboard.
I've actually seen it.
You have actually seen it. So there's not a dashboard, but they're definitely, we've definitely been keeping track and those we're counting, definitely doing all of the monitoring we should be. And we'll be bringing that information back to you all after break.
Beaverton did a recent thing where they said we need, I can't remember the number now, 500 new units per year. Wasn't that their goal? They said it in that broad sense. I'd like to see us do that too. to come at least to the numbers we set up with the UGB creation, if not farther, in order as a system of housing in our community. I take the mayor's point. There's a lot of work here, and a lot of it is good, and this is the stuff we're doing. But as Denny mentioned, I strongly feel that we need to do more. So I hope we can get to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and then we'll do some second rounds.
Thank you. So first of all, I also will add on to the comments about how great this report was and how much information it contained and how easy it was to understand. And you've already gotten so much praise, you probably don't need more, but I really like plans. They take time and some people hate doing it, but I think it's great and I love doing it because it keeps us focused and it keeps us accountable. And I loved Mike's questions about what does success look like? Because if you can't answer that question, the plan isn't very helpful, in my opinion. Like you need to know what success looks like when you get to the end and you're trying to figure out. And also, you know, making adjustments along the way if success doesn't look like it's happening. And how are we going to make success happen? Because that's what we want, right? I only had one question, just to clarify the way I understand the report, the anti-displacement plan, the half of 2023 to the end of 2024, that is for engagement and creation of this said plan, right? And then implementation would then be after that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. And it said that you don't have funding for that yet. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood. Okay, that is my only question.
Okay, Alan.
I'll let Matt go and then I'll go.
All right, Matt, you get a second round.
Great, thanks, Mayor. The presentation connected to the e-packet, the e-housing implementation packet, references that we review this work through an equity lens. And last week, I met with disability justice advocates, and I couldn't find, I hope it's in here, I couldn't find reference to ADA accessible units, numbers of, percentage of, et cetera. Is there a way to, well, let me ask it this way. What percentage of income qualified units in particular are ADA accessible in our municipality? What percentage is mandated by the federal government and or the state? And are we building enough units for the disability community and folks? When I look through, so there's the question. When I look through the packet, I see a lot of beautiful pictures of units, of new housing. I see a lot of stairs, and I recognize the massive amount of cost for having 100% of the units ADA accessible. The concern that was presented to me last week was there's a fear in the community, just north of 20% of the community identify as being disabled in some way or another, that the disability community is being somewhat redlined. And I don't subscribe to that, but I wanted to at least share the concerns and ask the pointed question about number of units or percentage of units. And are we doing enough in this community? I don't want to just meet the minimum. What are we doing to ensure that the disability community have access, especially when it comes to income qualified units?
So I can provide a partial answer to that. And I just want to acknowledge that it's not a full answer, which is important. And you know, some of the concerns that you're hearing are, I think, very troubling. So that feels like something that we can do some more work on, and hopefully make sure that we're addressing the wide variety of community needs. What I do know is that the general requirement through ADA, which applies to all development of any sort, is the provision that the first floor units are at least accessible, adaptable, which means that they can be turned into something that so that the design of them allows for accessibility. And so if someone who has specific needs wants to move into it, then the unit can be made ready for them. And so there's, for example, there's sufficient size bathrooms, and the kitchen dimensions are a certain size, and counter heights and things like that are all fixed. And so that is something that provides a baseline of accessibility. And when you think of first floor units as being covered by that, that puts it anywhere between something like a fifth to a half of the units that are created. You know, we have some taller buildings, so maybe somewhere between 10 and 50% of the units that are created, or I guess 100% in some developments. So that is the baseline with which we work. We can find some more information. I know that the work that we do, especially around affordable housing for people making less than 60% of area median income, we're currently having some conversations with some community groups that are specifically insightful and experienced working on this, and advocates for those who live with disabilities. And so we're trying to make sure that we are providing appropriate response as part of the community, as part of the city, and the work that is done by our community partners.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Mayor, for the second round.
Okay, Alan?
Yeah, I echo Claire's comments about the packet. Even if we get it on Saturday, that's fine with me. Sometimes I don't get to read my full packet until Sunday. I still like reading the hard copy, especially when it's this lengthy and this important. Overall, I think the plan's really well done. I think it is very comprehensive. It's easy to read, well laid out, and lots of really good actions in there. Overall, I think it's a very good plan, and I will support approving it and moving forward. I had a question though on the overall housing supply section, which is section 3 on page 25. There it talks about 25 of the report. It talks about the fact that we need 6,000 units over the next 5 years. And that so far over the last 10, 20 years, we've seen like 800 a year, and we need to do 1,200 a year to be able to get there plus. And so that's a 50% increase over what we've seen in the past. The question I have is, how are we going to ensure that some of those 6,000, if we get there, are helping solve our affordable housing crisis with little a, little h? How are we going to make sure that some of those are affordable? Or is it just relying on the market to supply the housing? Whatever we get, which is what we've been doing for the last 40 years, which is why we're in the affordable housing crisis that we're in. Because as far as I can tell, other than from the subsidy programs, 0% is coming from the market. And as Mike was saying, performance measurements, how do we have a performance metric on affordable housing beyond the subsidy programs that we have? And then I guess the real reason I'm asking is if we're relying solely on subsidy programs to solve the affordable housing crisis in Eugene, we're not going to get there. It's impossible. And so we need to do something more than that if we're taking that seriously. And I guess the question is, what are we doing with the 6,000 to make them more affordable? Little a, little h, not the subsidized programs, big A, big H, but the little a, little h affordable housing. So houses under $350,000. I mean, we're going to get a boatload of $600,000 homes and 400 to 600 plus. It's the other end of the scale that that the market's really not provided for Eugene for decades. And if we're just relying on the market, are we going to get the same thing?
I can speak to that a little bit, unless Denny, you want to jump in?
Well, I'll start. If you asked, I think, many experts, what is our biggest problem across the full spectrum of housing needs in Eugene, whether you're owning, renting, sheltering, it's supply. We have a supply shortage pretty much in every area of our housing continuum. And again, I think most of those experts would say the reason why we have an affordability crisis in Eugene is because we have a very low inventory across the full spectrum. So, one way to get at housing costs is just to have more housing across the full spectrum at any price point, because there's a shortage at every price point. Even if you're looking for an executive home, their supply is pretty low. So, I mean, everyone is struggling with finding the house that matches their income level and so forth. So supply in and of itself, as we build more housing, our hopes is that it does make a difference. The other thing that's come up a lot in these discussions is how do you make newly constructed, unsubsidized housing affordable? And I think the answer is it's very, very difficult because of the land costs, the construction costs, property taxes. All of those things make it very, very challenging to hit a price point that's affordable. So given that we don't control all of that, I would say that supply is a really big part of our strategy. We need more housing in Eugene across the full spectrum. And that will in and of itself start to hopefully stabilize the market no matter what income threshold that's at. So, and then I think as people move up the housing ladder, so to speak, that supply does free up some housing on the cheaper end as people move out of their, smaller, cheaper unit and move into a bigger, nicer unit. It does free up some housing maybe on the lower end that will become more affordable. So even if the newly constructed housing isn't affordable, having more supply generally loosens the market and makes it more affordable for everyone.
What I can add to that is that there's usually affordability comes through a few different ways, and we do have we have done some data collection, and that's something that we intend to start doing more regularly. We talked to apartment complexes around the community in 2018, and we found that older apartment complexes, it probably doesn't come as any surprise, but they were offering rents that were less than newer complexes, and they were somewhere between 30 and 60% less. So some of them were significantly cheaper. And it's a combination of many things. Some of them are in less fashionable neighborhoods. Others are just older and have more wear and tear. There's something significant about older housing that's not built with the latest building code and energy code. And those are, all of those things that go into brand new housing are things that drive up the cost. And so the newest units usually do come out at the top. So I think one way that we can find the market providing housing that's more affordable is just build it and then wait, which is one of the strategies we take with our urban forest, where we recognize that we can't instantly install extremely mature trees. So one of our best approaches when it comes to the urban forest is to plant as many as we can today, and then give them as much time as possible, and then hopefully get onto a better regimen of planting them, so that we have some natural turnover in that urban forest. When it comes to specific strategies, though, to create the affordability, the housing tools and strategies process, as you've pointed out, is one of the ways that we looked to reduce costs as much as possible, within reason, within our abilities, streamline process, and find ways that we are at least not compounding problems or compounding difficulties on people who are building, so that we give them more opportunity to charge less. We do have a couple of specific things. We do have the option of specifically subsidizing the housing, and that's something that we can do. It's like bringing in larger mature trees when we're planting. It's something that we can do to create space within the system as needed. We also have less active approaches, more passive approaches, and that's the LRFT program that was brought up before is one where we can provide a tax exemption, which helps, as you very well know, helps a number of new and existing places maintain affordability or achieve affordability because the city is not has reduced some of their operating expense. It's something that we can do without providing an active subsidy to them. And so I think that there are a few different tools and techniques that we can use to try to encourage more housing that's affordable to people, even if it's not capital affordable housing.
I'll need another round, Mayor.
Okay, and Mike is waiting for another round. I wanted to just interject a clarifying question, because one of the things in the same kind of pages that Alan was pointing out, we're talking about House Bill 2001, which actually is the other sort of intervention to create more housing types that presumably will increase housing types at a broader spectrum of affordability. And so this document doesn't try to predict what the impact on supply is going to be, but it seems to me that certainly by the 2-year time on this, we would actually begin to have some idea if how much HB 2001 is going to impact. And that's not calling for a subsidy. That's just letting the market, giving the market freedom to put more housing in the same amount of space. So, all right. With that, I will turn to Mike for a second round and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. I first want to agree with Denny entirely, except about one point. The factors you mentioned, land costs, taxes, regulation, those are things we entirely do control. And that's been my argument for many, many years now. When we increase SDCs by 50% for transportation and parks and other things, we little bit by little bit in not, you know, golden bullet, but golden buckshot, Alan. We in little ways all over, we increase we increase the cost of housing that way. And all of those things that I mentioned are within our control to change. And I think it's not just about, the answer isn't just about subsidies, but it's about measuring our impact on the market. Danny, I bring up the point initially about metrics here and measurements, because I think the more serious you are about solutions, the more you measure and the more you talk about that information. And I would like to see us have a much greater public availability of the metrics involved in this. I'd love to see, you know, permits published somewhere every year so we can see, as Alan mentioned, 800 new units a year, only less than 300 a year have been single family homes. So when you look at that in a historic context, we're building dramatically less than we have in the past. That's across the nation. That's not just us, but we make it worse here, in my opinion. We make it harder here. And the way I would prove that is, Alyssa, I appreciate you bringing up the initial monitoring information. There was a really interesting piece about that, and I can't remember, Denny, perhaps you can remind me, what's the period of time that growth monitoring covers?
Alyssa may be able to answer the time question, but I think the growth monitoring will include the number of units that are permitted every year and all that. So that is a metric we'll be tracking as well.
The number of years, is it 3? Is it 4? What is the?
So the current monitoring, the current plan, the current report that's out right now, the draft report is 8.5 years into the growth monitoring period. And just a reminder, there will be, after this first comprehensive report, there will be an annual growth monitoring report. It won't be as comprehensive, but it will certainly, I know it will include the number of units. So we will be providing that on an annual basis.
Excellent. One of the pieces that jumped out at me when I read that was the 15,000 new people that have moved here during the monitoring period, but even more so, the fact that the community has created 22,000 new jobs in the city of Eugene in that same period. And the interesting thing there is those folks live somewhere. So if we saw the population grow by 15,000, which was a good deal more than we expected, and we saw the number of jobs in Eugene grow by 22,000 new jobs. We don't even need to spend time arguing if some of those new population numbers are from the university to say that at least 7,000 new people are commuting to Eugene for work every year. And that's not helping us with our climate goals. They're moving somewhere else because it's cheaper. And this is the biggest, one of the three biggest goals I think we should be working on more frequently with clearer information for the public. Thank you.
Okay, and Alan, one more round.
Yeah, so I heard your answer and 2 comments and 1 question or suggestion. It seems to me unless we do something different, we're relying on a market that's going to do exactly what it's done for the past 30 to 40 years, and which is what's created our affordable housing crisis. And so without some kind of intervention into that marketplace, 100% reliance or only our reliance on subsidized housing programs isn't going to even come close to solving this issue. And you know, when we talk about supply, Denny, you're talking about the supply of houses, which is different from the supply of land. When we did the Envision Eugene process and we did the UGB, we set a 20-year land supply for residential. And we created the urban reserves process. Unless our analysis is completely wrong, which I don't believe it is, Mike, we did a good analysis that we have the statutory required supply of land to be able to meet our 20-year supply of housing. So we could blow out the UGB, and I bet you that wouldn't make a hell beans difference in terms of us getting towards solving our affordable housing crisis. So I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is an investigation into what other jurisdictions around the country have been doing to address affordable housing beyond just subsidy programs. What other things have they been looking at? What other regulatory approaches has they done? HB 2001, as the mayor said, allows for more choices and eliminated basically R1 and allows for more choices, which could end up creating more affordable housing, but it's not a sure thing by any imagination. But what other approaches have people taken, or cities and jurisdictions around the country taken? Inclusionary zoning, work for housing requirements, other kinds of things that we should be looking at. Because while this plan is great for the subsidized housing problems, the bigger picture is not being addressed. And we're going to, 2 years from now, when we review this program, I will just probably have the same speech. So is that something that staff's gonna do in your work plan? I didn't really see it in there. I saw parts of it, but looking into what other jurisdictions have done besides relying on subsidy programs to get housing.
I think there's 2 ways to look at that, Councilor Lincoln. One is, what have communities proactively done to change the landscape for housing affordability? And that could be regulatory and so forth. I think the other side of it, and maybe the more important side, is what makes that community different as far as its land costs, its labor costs, its property tax system. Do they have, local sales tax and other things they rely on? So property taxes are cheaper. Our labor market is different than other parts of the country. And so I think some of them are more natural just because of where you are geographically. The West Coast is a higher place to build. The construction costs are higher and so forth. So some of it is natural, some of it is more intentional. We could definitely look at some of those things.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I look at the poster behind Amanda's head. We can do hard things. This one's hard.
Okay, that everybody had a chance to ask and comment as much as they need. So Claire, did you manage to find some reference to the motion to put on the table? Good.
Yes, I've had at least 3 people send me the extremely complicated motion. If you're ready for it, let me know.
I'm ready for it.
Okay. I move to approve the housing implementation pipeline.
Second.
I don't understand the motion.
Very funny. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. And that passes unanimously. We're missing 2 counselors tonight. So thank you all very much. And with that, I'm excited that we're moving forward on this plan and that we have this. And, you know, just a final comment of gratitude for this, because I think to Matt's initial point about how often is this going to come back, I am assuming that each time you bring us something for approval or discussion or a prospect, you are going to remind us about where this fit within the HIP framework. So I think we'll have ample opportunities to be sort of tracking. And that's the point of having the HIP, is that you sort of track where your decisions fit within that larger plan. So thank you all very much, and a great set of questions, and we're adjourned until 7:30. See you then. Bye.